Lately, I've been thinking about Transformers Animated Season 4. Not the channel, but the real Season 4. What makes the abrupt ending all the more infuriating is that we've been given a decently detailed synopsis of what the show's fourth season would have been through the Allspark Almanac and issue 71 of the Transformers Collectors Club. I've spent countless hours dreaming and fantasizing about what could have been if these Season 4 plans were actually produced. And yet, the Season 4 I actually produced on this channel is very different. I've received many comments asking why. I thought that it'd be interesting, mostly just for me, to sit down and compare and contrast these original plans with what wound up being released on this YouTube channel and explain some of the decisions I made. Ultimately, it boils down to one major factor. I did not set out to create the Season 4 detailed in the Allspark Almanac and the Transformers Collectors Club issue. I set out to conclude Transformers Animated in a satisfying way. And those are two very different things. Keep in mind that Transformers Animated was never intended to conclude after 4 seasons. The creators wanted to keep the show going for a while. It's a trap that almost every Transformers show falls into. Animated, Prime, RID 2015, they all had incredibly ambitious agendas, spanning like 6 or 7 seasons, but they were shut down by the studio before they could get to that point. And unfortunately, that'll probably happen to Cyberverse too. No one can escape the 3-season curse. No one but Rescue Bots. So anyways, I had to alter a number of details in order to guide the series to a conclusion, rather than a 5th season. The main thing this encompassed was to stop introducing characters. A major pet peeve of mine is when series and comics introduce new characters all the way up to their season finale or series finale. A proper conclusion should work with previously established characters and concepts, rather than introducing a ton of stuff. Remember when RID 2015 only introduced the main villains of the series in the final 2 episodes? So to have the 4th season spend entire episodes introducing characters like Cosmos or the Minicons or Steam, it just wasn't a good idea. As a Transformers fan, you always want to throw in so many characters, because there are so many good characters in the franchise. You want to make more Starscream clones based on Thrust and Dirge and Acid Storm and Nova Storm and Ion Storm and Nacelle and Blitzstream. You want to give Soundwave all of his cassettes like Rumble and Frenzy and Slugfest and Buzzsaw. You want to put in every named Constructicon, Hook, Scavenger, Longhaul, Bone Crusher, Hightower, Scrap Metal, Demolisher? The various random other unnamed dudes. But you need to restrain yourself and put the story first and the main characters first. Because unless you have a good reason for it, unless these new characters are going to influence the plot or influence the main character's emotional arcs, it isn't good storytelling. The original Season 4 plans had all the characters getting brand new paint jobs, but changing all of their appearances for their home stretch just didn't seem like a good idea to me. In the original Season 4 plans, the only reason the color schemes were changed was for marketing purposes. G1 killed its characters when their toys retired, and this received massive backlash.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
So, they resorted to changing the characters' looks to maintain toy representation. It wasn't the writer's idea to give Primal and Megatron multiple body upgrades. Optimus Prime's Beast Hunter's look was a Hasbro mandate, and I'm sure that Optimus and Megatron's new looks in Cyberverse Season 2 are the result of the toy makers as well. But since I wasn't producing toys of my 4th season, there was no real reason to alter the aesthetics. With all that said, let's go on an episode-by-episode journey and explain what aspects of the episodes I adapted and what I didn't. The Trial of Megatron, Parts 1, 2, and 3. The main reason that I didn't directly adapt the Trial of Megatron was because of the 10-year time jump. I wanted to do a 10-year time jump because I liked the notion of Sari having the Autobots ripped out of her life for a decade, essentially putting her in our position. So that meant the trial was already passed, and the 4th season would begin with Megatron incarcerated. Another reason that I really toned down Resurgence Part 1 and 2 was because I knew that they'd be very rough. This was the first storyboard I'd ever done, and the only thing I'd ever edited before the storyboards was a Survivor parody that my family made when we went camping. I basically knew that visually, the first 2 episodes would be a train wreck, so I kept the stories very small in scale. I intentionally scripted the storyboards with no epic climactic battle until Resurgence Part 3 in the hopes that I had gotten the hang of it by then. And while there may be some graphical updates in store for the future, the original storyboards of Resurgence Parts 1 and 2, especially 1, were visually appalling and very limited. The description very specifically refers to Megatron blasting Kaon away. There's also concept art of the city being propelled by rockets. I changed it to Transwarp because the rocket idea is honestly just sorta goofy. Just an entire city flying through space. I did visually depict it in the Why the Decepticons Lose the War video, which is one of the earliest videos I ever released on the channel. Sentinel's actions in the Trial of Megatron are very similar to what unfolds in the storyboards, because that's just a very natural progression of his character. It's hard to imagine things unfolding any other way. Sentinel does separate the team in Resurgence. He imprisons them for violating a Cybertronian travel ban that he himself implemented because he knew they would go to Earth. Sentinel making a deal with Megatron makes too much sense. Some sort of Megatron-Sentinel interaction is completely inevitable, and given the kinds of characters these are, it's very clear what kind of interaction this would be. Sentinel comes to Earth with the intent of defeating Megatron all on his own. He soon realizes that he's considerably outclassed and decides to make a deal. The Trial of Megatron refers to General Strika's attacks on Energon farms. I did give Strika and Team Char a bit of an expanded role, but it was the original incarnation of Team Char. The Stunticon job and other supplementary material make it clear that Team Char would have changed. So why did I revert it? Given how minor a presence they were in the show, only appearing in 2 episodes, it felt strange to completely substitute their roster. The Allspark Almanac explains that the team change was because Blackout, Cyclonus, and Spidor embark on Operation Distant Thunder, leading Strika to replace them with Scalpel, Mindwipe, Blot, and Skybite. Leaning into the philosophy of not introducing unnecessary characters, I ultimately decided that Operation Distant Thunder had finished, and the team was back to its original lineup. The new Team Char members, as well as the Stunticons, do make non-speaking appearances in crowd and battle scenes, in Resurgence, as well as Optimus Rising, so they're not forgotten. I ultimately decided not to incorporate the Energon Cluster storyline, choosing to instead lean into a mystery based around Dark Energon as the season's MacGuffin. On an unrelated note, the Allspark Almanac refers to Energon as a theme of the season. That's not a theme. This always bothered me so much. A theme is like the main lesson, the main moral, and they just have Energon. I also didn't like the idea of Bulkhead leaving the main cast. With the direction that Transformers Animated was heading, dropping him did make sense. Bill Figurevac only voices 2 characters outside of Bulkhead, Hotshot and Master Disaster, who only appear in 2 episodes. Juxtapose this with literally every other main cast member, who voiced a ton of characters each. Given that the voice cast was expanding, and the episodes were getting more expensive to produce, dropping a voice actor who wasn't contributing as much was a smart move. Additionally, replacing Bulkhead with another main cast member voiced by Corey Burton meant that they didn't have to add a body to the recording booth. Corey Burton would have been making bank in Season 4. He literally would have been voicing 4 main cast members. And speaking of Ironhide, many people wondered why he didn't join the main cast in this channel of Season 4. He was brought to Earth in the Kaon Transwarp, and then fought with the main cast for Resurgence Part 3, then got thrown in jail by Sentinel because he knew too much, only to disappear for most of the season before breaking out of jail in the penultimate episode, spilling Sentinel's secrets, and staging an underground resistance against Sentinel and defending Cybertron in the season finale. That's pretty different. Well, I do have an explanation. Whereas Jazz joining the main cast makes a lot of sense, to the point where Jazz not joining the main cast would actually be a very strange choice, Ironhide as a main cast member just doesn't make sense within the world of Animated. He's an extra. And sure, he's a recurring extra, but that would be like if Farmer Sprott replaced Seuss in the main cast of Gravity Falls. I get that from a wider franchise perspective. It saves recording booth money due to Corey Burton playing dual roles, and it reflects the main cast of the 2007 live-action film. But zooming in, it's not a natural progression of the story. I really did toy with the idea of integrating him as a 6th main cast member, but it just didn't work. In Truck Not Monkey, Cade, the worst part of the storyboards, acts as a wide-eyed, "What is that? What's going on?" type character. In the original draft of that script, that was Ironhide. But it didn't feel right to me. Every main cast member has a spotlight episode each season, and the storyboards reflect that, but I couldn't think of a situation to incorporate Ironhide as an episode's protagonist. Heck, even the actual Season 4 plans don't seem to incorporate Ironhide as an episode's protagonist, and he is a main cast member in that. After spending a full 4 pages of script on the first 3-parter, it's time to move on to Episode 4, Allspark Ellipse Now. We don't actually know what the official release order was for the episodes in between the premiere and the finale. The Collectors Club issue and Allspark Almanac list them in different orders, so I'm just gonna go by what works best for the pacing of the video. I cherry-picked a lot of elements from Allspark Ellipse Now. Sentinel coming to Earth to use the Allspark against Megatron was used in Resurgence Part 3. Prowl's ghost possessing Cybertronians, of course, was used in this channel's own Allspark Ellipse Now Part 1 and Part 2. That episode features an original storyline, though, with Starscream gaining control of the Allspark and all Cybertronian life after Sentinel merges it with himself, leading Sari and Prowl's ghost to Cybertron to take the Allspark back and discover its origin. I actually developed this concept in 5th grade in 2011 when I first started brainstorming a 4th season. It's a bit shocking how consistent this concept remained from its original idea to its integration. I used the SUV and Headmaster in the episode because they hadn't really factored into any other, and I wanted Sari to have a team. Back in 5th grade, I had Sari bring the Dinobots with her to Cybertron, when thinking about desertion of the Dinobots from G1, under the premise that maybe the fact that the key brought them online gave them immunities to Starscream's control. Didn't really make sense. I'm happy that I went with the SUV though, because the Dinobots already got a fair amount of use in the season, whereas the SUV wouldn't have. Truck vs. Monkey. This episode is the most obscure because it was not mentioned in the Allspark Almanac or the Transformers Collectors Club issue. It was mentioned by Derek J. Wyatt on Formspring on August 22nd, 2010. Unfortunately, the website Formspring no longer exists. I've tried to access the post through the Wayback Machine and through an incredible variety of means for several hours, but it's simply gone as far as I can tell. However, the TFA 2005 forum discussing the Formspring article still exists, and it clearly states this episode description. TF Wiki has also mentioned this episode on its Primal Major entry. I thought that this was a great way to reintroduce Black Arachnia and Waspinator and pick up where Predacon's Rising left off. I struggled with the script at first. The first 7 minutes or so played out the same, with Black Arachnia wanting Optimus to undergo the transport procedure himself in order to find a cure. Optimus then clones himself and has the clone undergo the procedure. Then what? The clone's just on a rampage. Is it a super thin plot narrowly strung together by Beast Wars references? I finally started placing my thinking on Waspinator. What exactly are his plans? We've never received any insight as to what these might have been. Given how simple his processor is, it couldn't be anything too complex. I watched Beast Wars for the first time when creating the script, and I noticed how similar in personality Cheetor is to Bumblebee. And then it hit me. Waspinator's plans should be to put Bumblebee under the same transwarp procedure that he went through. And that makes perfect sense. That completely gels together. And then the episode kinda just flowed. The major theme of this episode, as well as the season as a whole, is to stop beating yourself up over the past. You can't change the past, but you can change the future. Optimus is distraught that he didn't kill Megatron when he had the chance, and was manipulated by Megatron into bringing the Decepticons to Earth in Resurgence. Bumblebee is upset that he missed out on Sari's life for the last 10 years, and feels like she didn't need him. Black Arachnia can't get over her techno-organic side in her accident on Arcus 7. But by the end of the episode, all 3 of these characters learn to let go, stop beating themselves up, and not make the same mistakes again. Turf War. Here it is, the Constructicons finally combined into Devastator. If only we gotten to see it! Funnily enough, we almost did. Twice! The Allspark Almanac mentioned that they nearly introduced Devastator in A Bridge Too Close, but decided to wait because that's a pretty dense episode as it is. And then, he almost came back as the main thread of Endgame, although they decided to lead into the Omega Supreme storyline and the cloning storyline, which I think ultimately wrapped up the season better. The Allspark Almanac also states that Bulkhead was considered as an unwilling member of Devastator. This makes sense, as Bulkhead was present in the mind during A Bridge Too Close. But given that Bulkhead wouldn't have been on Earth or a main character during the original Season 4, I guessed he wouldn't have been a part of Devastator. Anyways, Devastation was by far the episode that changed the most from the original concept to finished episode. It was almost fundamentally different. The episode titled Can We Fix It, as a Bob the Builder reference, would have opened like this: Dirt Boss overpowering the Dinobots and implanting Cerebro Shells. This also would have been the episode to incorporate Lockdown before a con job was envisioned. Dirt Boss calls in Lockdown to get Devastator supplies. I never really knew what specifically or how Dirt Boss would even know Lockdown. I was in 5th grade. I didn't think it through. Ultimately, the Dinobots would then go on a rampage and start destroying Lockdown's ship. Bumblebee would get his hydrofoil upgrade from Lockdown's ship. Lockdown would manage to steal Grimlock's fire breath. When I first envisioned how Devastator would form, the information that Bulkhead may have been a part of Devastator flat out didn't exist yet. So Devastator combines, consisting of Dirt Boss, Scrapper, Mixmaster, Bone Crusher, Hightower, Long Haul, and Rampage, just the DeviantArt design. What's his motivation? I didn't know. But Devastator's rampaging around, and the Autobots discover that the Decepticons are on the same barge as them as they travel to the island. There's a big free-for-all between all the Decepticons and all the Autobots and Lockdown and Dinobots and the Stunticons and Astro Train. What are they fighting for? I never figured that out. How does it end? I never really figured that out either. The script, as it was the epitome of an elementary schooler fan fiction from 2011. But when I came back to adapt it for the actual production, I decided to strip back the number of characters significantly. Sorry didn't need to be here, and most of the Decepticons. The decision to make Bulkhead a part of Devastator against his will is really what clicked the whole episode together. It also reduced the cast. Making Rampage a dog means one less voice. For all intents and purposes, I only introduced 2 new Constructicons, Long Haul and Hook, who, while not complex characters, have distinct personalities and are necessary troops for Bulkhead to preside over. And most importantly, I wanted to give Dirt Boss and Devastator a motivation for what they were doing. So leaning into Turf War's inspiration, I made Devastator pursue Energon, this time in cube form, rather than deposit form. Every single character in Devastation has a specific motivation, and they all factor in together. The Constructicons want Energon, Mixmaster and Scrapper want freedom from being involved in the war against their will. The Dinobots want their island back. Megatron wants the Constructicons' combiner technology. Bulkhead at first wants nothing to do with the Constructicons, but after having his optics open by Mixmaster and Scrapper, really just wants to make things right with his former friends. Once again, this plays into the season's central theme of not dwelling on your mistakes. Bumblebee and Optimus are specifically the ones to teach Bulkhead the lesson because they themselves had just learned it in the previous episode. Ultimately, Devastation ends with redemption for Mix and Scrap, as they set out determined to resist Dirt Boss. I don't have any major issues with this script, unusually. I think that everything plays out in the most authentically TFA way possible. Steam. Steam is another concept that I didn't incorporate. Despite the fact that they appeared in the original series production Bible, Save the Earth and Mankind didn't necessarily appeal to me. I don't think I could have successfully designed brand new human characters, and I'm really incompetent when it comes to the steampunk aesthetic. I'm sure that this would have been a great, beloved episode, I just didn't know what to do with it or how to do it. I still wanted a Soundwave episode though, obviously, and we got The Sound of Music. Really the only similarity here is that both episodes feature Soundwave. The Sound of Music. I really think it was a good idea in theory. Soundwave controlling everyone through music is totally something I could see Transformers Animated doing for real. But I'm just not a music person. I remember I gave the scripts to the actors to sing, and Mason Eckley, the voice of Optimus, was like, "Where's the sheet music?" And I was like, "What's that?" Darion Stormer, the voice of Ratchet and Jazz, literally said, "I'm getting tired of voice acting, Kian," because he was recording his lines for that episode for like 3 hours. We were there until it was dark after school. I remember that I made Hannah Cornelius, the voice of Sorry, come to the school at like 7 in the morning since she had rehearsal after school to record her lines. Then I accidentally spilled her coffee on her about 20 minutes into it, so she's just sitting there, tired, miserable, covered in coffee, recording easily the worst musical ever written. It was something beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful, but also a complete and utter disaster. To this day, Sound of Music is the only episode I've never gone back and rewatched, and I don't plan to change that. Anyways, I always envisioned Wreck-Gar reappearing in the Soundwave episode for some reason. The scene where Bumblebee, Ratchet, and Sorry visit Wreck-Gar in his garbage fortress is actually a sequence that I came up with in 5th grade that made it into the episode mostly unchanged. Back in 5th grade, I imagined Wreck-Gar getting killed off by Soundwave at the episode's end, which leaves Ratchet with a raging vendetta against Soundwave for the rest of the season. But that was really dark. Elementary schoolers are morbid, man. I don't believe that TFA would kill an innocent comic relief character like Wreck-Gar. That's some messed up stuff, so I abandoned that idea. When I decided to make the Soundwave episode a musical, Wreck-Gar had a massive reason to be in the episode because Weird Al is an incredible singer. The third thread of this episode is Porter C. Powell running for mayor. That's also an idea I had back in 5th grade. Way back then, I had a multi-episode story arc where Powell wins the election, the Autobots wind up on the run from the police drones that Powell sends to hunt them down and destroy them. I think I came up with this before Age of Extinction, weirdly. Then Sorry would have killed him. What was I up to in 5th grade? I decided that Powell would lose the election. The idea of Wreck-Gar becoming mayor is so ridiculously stupid that it just completed the episode for me. The Sound of Music later spun off into the Machine-Churian candidate, a non-musical alternative which added a courtroom subplot where the Autobots get sued for not owning their vehicle modes, and changed the main plot to Soundwave mind-controlling Porter C. Powell and using him as a puppet for his agenda. This episode was just cramped. It felt like Spider-Man 3. It was just so bizarre. I liked it.
My first act as mayor will be enacting a bill that requires all inhabitants of Detroit to accept machines as their superiors and become their servants.
Well, that's kind of weird. Gremlins in the Gears. This episode never sounded particularly interesting to me. The decision to not adapt this episode is what made me not adapt the K-On! Minicons, because if they don't serve a role in this story, then why include them at all, since this would have been their main role. I love the idea of continuing the Ratchet/Fanzone relationship. This is why Hate Machines is one of my favorite episodes of the entire series. So, with the only thing I desired lifting being Ratchet and Fanzone's relationship, this was sort of an empty episode. But believe it or not, Gremlins in the Gears somehow evolved into Con Job. There's no mention of Lockdown or Swindle in the Season 4 plans, so I was left to my own devices when it came to continuing their story. As it happens, I've always wanted to see these two low-life characters interact. They clearly know each other, as we found out in SUV and 5 Service of Doom.
How did you get this frequency?
A mutual bounty hunting friend provided it in exchange for a weapon or two. Professional scruples prevent me from revealing his name.
But we never see their interactions. So a double cross during a sketchy arms deal made its way into my itinerary. Now, during the Lockdown episodes, Lockdown really shifted from being Ratchet's nemesis to being Prowl's. I wanted to bring this episode back to its roots of Thrill of the Hunt, while still incorporating the Cyber Ninja stuff introduced in 5 Servos of Doom. I mean, Lockdown, if he served under Yokotron, that means he used to be an Autobot. That's a pretty huge bombshell to drop on us. So the desire to finally resolve Ratchet and Lockdown's story led to these duos being combined. I threw in the show's low-life third wheel Rattletrap into a minor role, and also brought back RC into the episode given her history with Lockdown and Ratchet. Skywarp and Thundercracker winding up under Swindle's control is another idea that I came up with back in 5th grade, since these were the spacebound characters. All the character dynamics, as well as allusions to Age of Extinction, really just made the whole script fall into place. Lockdown, deep down, is incredibly insecure despite the facade he puts off. About what he's doing, he hurts and betrays people and is too stubborn to acknowledge that he commits wrong. However, after Ratchet exposes him and he really reflects on his life and his betrayals, Lockdown decides to sacrifice his spark in the hope that he can achieve one worthwhile thing with his life and be remembered. This is not a necessary sacrifice. These aren't world-ending consequences if Swindle keeps his space station floating, but it's necessary for Lockdown to find inner peace. Throw in a contrast between Lockdown, who forces himself to be alone, and Fanzone, who's incredibly lonely at this point in his life, and we get one of the standout episodes of the Storyboards. This is why I hate organics. While on the subject of Rattletrap, he would have received his own episode had Transformers Animated received a 4th season. This is an episode concept that I don't see talked about too much because it wasn't featured in the Allspark Almanac, but there's not a lot to say here. Rattletrap was only an singular scene of the show. In its original form, where Transformers Animated would have had countless more seasons, then sure, why not have a Rattletrap episode? But when I came at this with the intent of wrapping up the series, this just was something I had to cut. Mirror, Mirror. The storyboard of Mirror Mirror is almost a direct adaptation of this description. It's pretty much as close as you can get to the real episode based on the information we have. The only major difference is that of who goes to the alternate dimension. In the original, it's Sari and Bulkhead. In mine, it is Sari, Bumblebee, and Megatron. There are multiple reasons. Sari and Bulkhead do not stay behind on Cybertron in my storyboards. As such, it could be anyone. I chose to replace Bulkhead with Bumblebee because I feel that Bumblebee and Sari's relationship is a lot more important to the core of the series. Transform and Rollout revolves almost entirely between their connection, and countless other episodes do as well. Bumblebee and Sari never had another solo adventure again after SUV, and while their dynamic could have become grating sometimes, it was very important to me that they had one last hurrah. Megatron accompanied them because I thought that the alternate dimension was the perfect place to continue the Dark Energon story. Megatron incapacitates his alternate dimension counterpart and then uses an electronic paint job to impersonate him, leading to a reveal at the end of the episode. There isn't a ton to say. It's very by the books in terms of what an introductory alternate dimension episode should be like. Only the main cast got alternate dimension counterparts to keep the story simple. And I killed Shattered Glass Cade because everyone hated him. At this point, I hated him, and I regretted making Cade more than my parents regretted making me. What a tangled web we weave. Ideals very directly adapts his concept and expands it into a two-parter to focus on and dissect the main Decepticon cast, excluding Starscream who's dead. I didn't necessarily take Black Arachnia in the Predacon army direction because I honestly didn't think it makes sense for her character. I'm sure the show would have fully explained it and fleshed it out and made it work perfectly fine. But as it is, it seems like an unusual leap for her to suddenly be building an army of the very things she despises the last time we see her. Ideals was really just a character analysis. The animated Decepticons were pretty two-dimensional. It's harsh, but it's true. I wanted to thoroughly build all these guys up as complex emotional beings before rolling into the finale, and I'm happy with it. Shockwave seeks approval. Megatron isn't the same idealist he used to be. Blitzwing's personality was fractured so that he wouldn't be a threat to Megatron's power. Lugnut finds his loyalty in Megatron tested, which surprised a lot of the viewers, but I think makes perfect sense. Look at how jealous Lugnut is of Shockwave. This was clearly building towards something. Maybe it wasn't straight out defection, as I depict, but I don't rule it out. I could easily see a Lugnut and Blitzwing redemption arc occurring in the actual series. For such a long two-parter, there isn't a ton to explain because you can pretty much take the episode at face value. But I think that Ideals turned out pretty well, and I think a lot of other people did too. Process of elimination. God, what a premise. Outside of the trial of Megatron, and Megatron must be destroyed, this is the episode I want to see the most. But that raises the question, why wasn't it in the storyboards? Well, it's because a mystery is only as good as its answer. Something J.J. Abrams needs to learn. And I just couldn't think of an answer to the mystery posed here. The little promo art shows Cliffjumper as the culprit. We really don't know anything about Cliffjumper in this series. But what do you think? Is Cliffjumper just mad that he dies in every continuity and is just taking it out on his platoon mates? I'd honestly love to hear your thoughts about this, because this episode fascinates me so much. Triple threat. That's a pun. I didn't necessarily adopt the Marauder Megatron storyline. Sure, he puts on the armor to become Marauder Megatron, but he doesn't become a triple changer. I didn't adapt this because I didn't like the idea of Megatron's insanity being the byproduct of a cosmetic change. I feel that Megatron's downward spiral of insanity should happen without the triple changer mod. He used to be an idealist, but he spirals into a twisted warmonger. Ideals wouldn't have really worked if the triple changer mod was responsible for Megatron's identity shift. It came from planet Cybertron. I covered why I didn't use this earlier. Again, I'm sure it would have been a funny episode. I get serious garbage in, garbage out vibes from this, but it would feel strange to happen in the final season. I really wonder what Cosmos' important message was, though. You know, it would have been some big bombshell crucial to the season. It's kind of like how Nature Calls was a pretty comedic, silly episode, and then boom, Sumdac finds Megatron's body right at the end. I just imagine 21 minutes of silly hijinks, and then in the last minute, Cosmos gets his memory back, and it's like, Optimus, Sentinel got cancer. And then crap just hits the fan going into the finale. we're most likely never gonna know what this secret message was supposed to be, and that makes me really sad. Megatron Must Be Destroyed, Part 1 and Part 2. Optimus Rising pretty much is Megatron Must Be Destroyed. The only difference is that Optimus gathers everyone, and Megatron had gathered largely every Decepticon character throughout the preceding episodes. I tried to tie everyone together, and that all the Decepticons are in Kaon by the time the series finale starts, and all of Optimus' allies have been reached out to so we can just get to it. Stuff can start happening, as opposed to 22 minutes of build-up and a Bridge Too Close Part 1, and then 22 minutes of actual events and a Bridge Too Close Part 2. Sorry, of course, already discovered her true origin in the previous two-parter, Allspark Ellipse Now Part 1 and 2. One thing that I did with Optimus Rising that Megatron Must Be Destroyed probably wouldn't have done is really bring the show back to its roots. And once again, it's not something that Megatron Must Be Destroyed was compelled to do, since it was intended to just be an odd season finale, not the end of the show. But it was important to me that the characters really reflect on where they used to be. Something that I think is nice to see in a finale. For Megatron, Sentinel, and Shockwave, their defeats are a direct consequence of their own actions. Shockwave is taken offline by Waspinator, the bot that he framed to ruin the life of, and thrown into a transwarp generator that he forced Black Arachnia to build for him. Sentinel's selfish actions and desperate attempts to cling to his own power are what allow him, his entire Elite Guard battalion, to be cyberformed. He's forced to watch the only bots who are loyal to him go offline as a direct consequence of his own actions. Megatron's lack of empathy and disregard for life beyond his own leads to his most loyal lieutenants betraying and incapacitating him. Megatron is reduced to a head once again and taken offline by the man who he manipulated for 50 years. I think that Megatron and Sentinel were very similar characters, but one thing distinguishes them. Deep down, Sentinel cares about Optimus. He cares about his friends. Even despite his corruption and lust for power, you can tell that he has a soft spot for Optimus. Megatron, meanwhile, does not care. Ultimately, the theme of the season comes back into play in the finale. Megatron, Sentinel, and Shockwave are unwilling to reflect on their past mistakes and not willing to change themselves for the better, and it leads to their demise. Whereas Optimus, Bumblebee, Bulkhead, the whole cast, they finally find peace with their past, and it leads them to great things. And that's a better theme than Energon. At the end of the day, a nagging insecurity within me always reminds me that no matter how good I might be able to make this fourth season, it's never going to be as good as what Marty Eisenberg and Derek J. Wyatt had planned. I'll never be able to live up to their legacy. And it might be true. Transformers Animated was a gem. It's meant so much to me throughout so much of my life, and it has to so many people as well.